PowerShell scripting, working with SQL Server databases, and we're going to include other databases as well. This is one of two nuggets where we're going to be playing around with SQL Server. I'll actually show you how to get the thing installed so you can play with it in a lab environment if you want to. This is going to be kind of the raw, I don't know what I need to do with SQL Server, so I need to be prepared for anything version of this. If you skip ahead a few nuggets, we're going to do one that's a little bit more, I don't want to call it dumbed down, but I've kind of done some of the work for you. So between the two of those, you should be able to cover all your bases. Now in this nugget, I'm going to start by showing you how to install SQL Server Express. Everything I'm going to show you will work with pretty much any version of SQL Server since like 2005, maybe even earlier. But Express is a good way if you just want to keep some data locally for your own purposes. If maybe instead of writing a script that saves information to Excel on your local computer, you're going to save it to a database on your local computer instead. And I'll show you how to set up a database because we are going to learn how to write information to that database and read information from it. Now, all this is going to require a little bit of knowledge of the SQL language, which I'm not actually going to give you. I'm going to show you how to take a SQL query that's already been written and execute it by using PowerShell. So we're focused on the PowerShell piece of this, but I did a great set of CBT Nuggets videos on the SQL language. So you've already got access to that. So if you need to learn more about the actual query language, that information's already out there. Now this is obviously not a nugget about SQL Server, but I also don't want to assume that you just happen to know everything about SQL Server. So for the first part of this, we're going to do just a little bit of setup. I have pointed my web browser to download.microsoft.com, and I'm going to search it for SQL Server Express. Now, what I'm going to show you is going to work with any version of SQL Server. In fact, with very little modification, and I'll explain that, it'll work with any database server that you have Open Database Connectivity, ODBC, drivers for. But if you don't have a copy of SQL Server on your network where you can stick data, you can download the free SQL Server Express. Grab whatever version you want. I'll poke at 2012 here. When you hit download, you're confronted with a lot of files, and I feel that it is important for me to help you understand which of these you should be downloading. So this one is SQL Server Express 64-bit. This is SQL Server Express with advanced services. Now that includes things like SQL Server reporting services, 64-bit. So if you're going to stick a bunch of data in a SQL database and you want to generate management reports from it, this is the version you want. It also includes the management tools. This is SQL Server Express with tools. So it's the same as this one, adding the management tools for 64-bit. This is just the tools for 64-bit. And then if you scroll down a bit, I suspect we'll see the x86 versions, which are the same things for 32-bit. Now, this is the one I like to tell people to download because people get into this thing where they start sticking data into CSV files so that you can use them as reports, or they try and automate sticking things into Excel so they can generate management reports, and that's crazy talk. Both of those things are not designed for that. Download SQL Express, stick your data in SQL Express, and then use SQL Server reporting services to generate reports from it. Now, if you do this on a full version, the non-Express version of SQL Server, you can stick data in it, and you can have reporting services automatically generate reports and deliver them via email on a schedule, and that is just awesome. All right, I'm going to close this because I actually already downloaded, and I got just the plain SQL Express with tools. We're not going to get into reporting and all that kind of garbage right now. We will eventually. But for right now, here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to let this thing install. It's going to take it a little bit to extract. So let's, no, it's actually kind of going pretty quickly. Oh, that's nice. Okay, and we have a wizard. So we're going to do a new installation. This is going to do a little bit of a prerequisite check, which it looks like we passed. Okay, I accept. And it looks like we've got an update that should be included with this. So let's go ahead and let it do that. We'll let the little download run. Okay, and once it finishes with the update, it will actually start installing the setup file so that it can install SQL Server. Yeah, it's a multi-part process. And you will eventually be looking at the actual installation. So this is where we decide what we're going to install. Now, I'm not planning to play with replication, so I'll save a little bit of room and uninstall that. But we will install the management tools. This is where it's going to install those. Make sure you're happy with that. And it's going to run a little bit of a check and make sure that I've selected all the prerequisites. Okay, here's your first big decision. SQL Server is designed to run multiple copies of itself side by side on your computer. Each one is called an instance. If you specify a computer name when you try to connect it to SQL, you will connect to the default instance. Every other instance has to have its own name, which means you have to not only specify the server name, but also the instance name. SQL Express defaults to installing a named instance of itself called SQL Express, and that is its instance ID. We're going to leave that in place. Now, if it's the only copy of SQL that's ever going to go on this computer, it's fine to install the default instance, but I'm just kind of used to working with Express this way, so I'll leave it. We'll do a little check of disk space requirements. Ooh, I hope I should have enough. Guess we'll find out. Yep. Server configuration. Need to provide some passwords. I'm going to have both of these run as, well, this one is NT service and this one as local service, so I don't need passwords for either of those. SQL Browser is disabled by default anyway, so I'm not going to mess with it. You can run this under a service account and provide a password if you want to. That's fine. Leave the database engine set to automatic. That way you don't have to start it up every time you want to use it. Then we'll get some configuration. Now, I'm going to leave the authentication mode at Windows. That means I'm going to authenticate using my Windows logon account. Now, as a Windows administrator, I will become a SQL Server administrator because I've specified that here. It's going to add the administrator account as administrator. You can add the current user. This is probably going to tell me that it already did. Yeah, it's already there. You can add other users, other local or domain user accounts to be administrators in your new SQL Server instance. Data directories, these are the default directories where new databases will be created. And that's really all we need to mess with right now. I don't want to send error reports to Microsoft, but thanks. And now we will install. I'm actually going to take a quick break and go grab some coffee. This is going to take 10-15 minutes to run, so when we come back, it should be all finished. And we are done, and we've got green lights across the board. Excellent. All right, let's close all this out. Now, what are we going to do with it? Well, the first thing is to decide what you want to put into SQL Server. Now, I'm going to briefly open up the ISE here, and I'm going to grab a piece of paper. Post-it note. Oh, post-it notes. Okay. Let's go after that OS Tools module that I play with a lot. There's PowerShell modules, OS Tools PSM1. Let's see what this thing outputs. Yeah, here we go. You know what? Let's do disk details instead. Yeah. Okay. So this spews out computer name, drive, free space, size, and free percent. And computer name is a string, disk is a string, free space is a number, size and free percent are numbers. All right. Because you got to know what you want to put into the database. So with that in mind, let's say we want to create a log. We want to create a database table where we can stick this information. And then maybe we want to run reports or queries or whatever we want. I don't care what we want to do. We just want to put stuff in there. All righty. Now, oh, right, Windows 8. Hit Windows button. Wait for things to occur. SQL. I'm just going to type SQL and look for SQL Management Studio. Yay. Now you can do all of this from PowerShell, but it's basically just writing transact SQL T-SQL commands. So we'll do a little bit of that, but I'm going to show you how to get the database set up in the GUI here. I mean, if you're not really a SQL person, then, good enough. This is going to want me to connect. You can see it's starting with my server name, well, computer name, and a backslash, and then the instance name. So we installed this as the SQL Express instance. It's using Windows authentication, which means I'm going to log on as whoever I'm logged on to Windows as. Okay. Let's make that a little bigger. I'm going to create a new database. Now, a database can contain lots of different information. So I'm going to give it a kind of a generic name. And I'm running this on my own computer. This is my admin workstation. This is data I'm collecting for my own purposes. We're not going to run, the company's SAP off of this. So I can be a little casual. I'm going to go away. I hate those little pop-ups. I'm going to be a little bit casual. I'm just going to call this admin data. I'm going to let it store it in the default location. I'm going to give it a 10 megabyte size to begin with. That's tons of information, but it'll also get bigger if it needs to. And because nothing that I'm putting in here, at least in my head, needs to be backed up, this is all data I can reproduce, I'm going to leave it in the simple recovery model. Now, that means it's going to be a little bit more self-maintaining. If you're concerned about losing data, you can move it to the full recovery model. Frankly, if this is just going to be an informal database where you're going to store your own stuff, leave it in simple and take a backup every now and again, and you'll be fine. Simple just makes it a little bit more self-maintaining. So I'm going to leave all that, and here's admin data. So now I need to create a table. A table is basically an Excel spreadsheet. Rows of data and columns of information. So my first column is going to be, you will appreciate yourself better if you just put an ID number in here. Make it an integer and do not allow nulls. And down here, have it automatically fill this in by selecting an identity specification. So that just means each row is going to get a unique ID number, and SQL Server will make it up automatically. It just helps with a few different types of operations you may need to get into. All right, so now we tell it what we want to actually store in here. First is computer name. That is going to be an N varchar, and computer names can be up to, 16 characters long? Whatever. So I'm going to put that there and say that information has to be filled in. Next is going to be drive. Now I'm choosing to make these column names the same as the property names that my function outputs. You don't have to. In fact, just to prove it, let's call this drive letter. And I need to make a note of that on my little post-it note because that'll mess me up when I go to write code later. Drive letter. It's embarrassing how many post-it notes I use. And actually, let's just make this an ncar and 2. One for the letter and one for the colon that comes after it. So varchar means it can be a variable length up to 16 characters. Char means it's always going to be 2 characters, no more, no less. All right, free space can be an integer. Size can be an integer. And free percent. Does that output a whole number or was it a decimal? Disks, free space, disks by size times 100, so that'll be a whole number. So that can be an integer. You only allow null if there's some piece of information that might not exist in every row. Now, everything I put in here is going to have all these pieces of information, so none of them will allow null. I'll hit save, and we'll call this disk data. And then if we refresh over here, we should see our disk data table. Now, there's a few things I can do to make this a little bit quicker. For example, I can make sure this is set to be the primary key because that row uniquely identifies, or that column uniquely identifies each row because I have it making up a number each time. I plan to look things up by computer name, so I'm going to add some indexes here. We'll add an index on the computer name column. And let's make it a composite index that also includes the drive letter. So computer name and drive letter is how I plan to look things up. And we'll hit close. We'll save the new table design. And that's really all we should need to do in this tool. We just have to remember what we named everything, and I've just forgotten. So the table is disk data, and the database name is admin data. Okay, so here's what we'll do. Back in the ISE here, I've got this function called get disk details, line 41 right there. So I'm going to make another function that's designed to save that information in the database. Function save disk details to database. And this is going to take as its input parameter input object. And let's go ahead and make this an advanced function. We'll add the commandlet binding to it, because then in my parameter block, should have just started this way, I guess. I'll put parameter enter mandatory equals true, value from pipeline equals true. And I got to spell mandatory correctly, don't I? Mandatory. And we'll just call this a generic object, and it can take more than one. Oops, missed a square bracketage. And then in my process script block, well, actually I'll have a begin, I'll have a process, and I'll have an end. So in my begin script block, I need to make a connection to the actual database. Now, let's see here. I'm gonna play, but let's see. New object, type name, system.data.sql client. No, I think it's .sql client. There it is. Okay, so that's the fact that that's tab completing for me means that this assembly is already loaded in the shell, so I don't need to load that part of the .NET framework. So the first thing I need to do is create a new connection. Connection equals new object. Man, tab completion. Type name system.data.sql client.sql connection. Cool. Now we need to go get a connection string. Connection.connection string equals quote quote. Now these connection strings can be a little bit tricky, and that's why I never bother to even try and remember them. I go to connectionstrings.com. All right, and once that comes up, let's get down to SQL Server connection strings. They rearrange this site completely from time to time, so don't freak out if it looks different. .NET, .NET, that's what we're using. Connect to SQL Server 2012. Here we go, SQL Server 2012, okay. Standard security, that's what we're using. Nope, that's not what we're using. We're using trusted connection because it's Windows authentication. So we're going to copy, doop, 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 and paste. Server is client /SQL Express. You got to make sure you put the instance name there. Database is admin data. That's all we need for right there. Then we need to simply open the connection. Connection.open. Now it's a method, so it's got to have the open parens after it. Now at the end, we got to remember to close this little booger. Connection.close. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there now, because otherwise, I know for a fact I'll forget. Remember that the process block is going to run once for each item that comes into input object. So I'm going to assume, just to keep this simple, that the only way we're ever going to get input to this is via the pipeline. So I'm not going to bother enumerating that out. So input object is going to represent a disk that has computer name, drive, free space, size, and free percent properties. So the first thing I want to do is see if this computer name and drive already exists in the database. So here's how I'll do that. I like to put my SQL statements into a variable first, and in just a moment I'm going to show you why that is. So I like to just put this into a variable all by itself. Select count There's that ID column that I created, and I need to, I'm going to create a name for this as num, whatever. So this is going to create a column called num that contains the count from my disk data table where the computer name equals something and the drive equals something. And look, we're not going to go over the T-SQL language. CBT Nuggets has got a fantastic nugget that I did on the SQL language if you want to learn more about this. I'm also not taking a lot of security precautions here. I'm assuming that I'm the one providing the data to this and that I'm not trying to hack the database or something. So some of the practices I'm going to show you should freak you out a little bit if you're writing an application that users will interact with, but I'm not doing that here. So I'm taking some shortcuts. So the computer name is in my input object dot computer name parameter. So I'm using a sub expression. Because I'm in double quotes, these single quotes don't count. The outermost quotes count. Double quotes, this sub expression is going to take the computer name property off my input object. And the drive, we called the column drive letter in the database. And so that is in the input object dot drive. So this is going to return a count for the number of rows where the computer name is the current computer name and the drive is the current drive. That's probably going to be 0 or 1. All right, so that's going to inform what I do next. The reason I like to put that information in a variable, oops, we're going to do write debug, is so that if I have a problem with this, I can run the function with the -debug parameter and it'll display the actual SQL query that it's trying to execute. Makes debugging a little easier. So the next thing I need to do is create a command object to execute this. Command equals new object, type name, system.data.sqlclient.sql command. I have to set the command's connection object equal to my connection. That's how it knows what server to talk to. I'm going to set the command's text to the SQL statement I want to run. And the command type is, oh heck, I don't think I actually have to do this, but I want to show you where you would find it. So let's open up another tab on Explorer here. System.data.sqlclient.sql command. Just going to show you the documentation for this particular class. You don't actually need to fill in that command type. If you're just giving it a simple string, it'll assume it's a query it needs to execute. But I want to show you how I find the documentation for these things. Did it seriously just lose my... Fine. SQL system.data.sql... Oh, no, it is coming up. SQL command class. Okay, here's the documentation for that, and I'm going to scroll down to the command type property, and it says this is a value that indicates how command text should be interpreted, so I'm going to click on that. It tells me that this accepts a value of this type, system.data.command type. I'll click on that to find out what the valid options are. So one of them is text. So here's how you could actually do this, because as you can see in the documentation, whoa, this is an enumeration. So here's how you can do this. System.data.command type, that's what it says this is, .text. And that says I want you to interpret this as text, meaning just a text query, as opposed to it being a stored procedure name, right? But it'll default to that, so I'm actually going to take that out. So we've done this. Reader equals command.execute query, execute reader. This is going to execute the query and then return a SQL data reader object. Now that contains all of our query results. In my case, I'm expecting it to contain a single row with a single column called num that will contain 0 if there is not an existing row with this computer and disk name, and contain 1 if it does. So that's going to tell me if I need to insert a new row or update an existing row. there's a simpler way you can do this with the logic, right? My whole point here is that in the database, if I've already got a drive entry for localhost C colon, I want to update it. If I don't already have a drive entry for localhost C colon, I want to add it. Well, here's a fun little trick. Rather than doing this is kind of a clean way to do it, but I'm going to show you a little quick and dirty trick. Look what I'm doing here. Delete from disk data where computer name is this and drive letter is this. Well, that is a non-query. Delete doesn't return results, so this is going to be execute non-query. All that's going to do is forcibly delete it. So if it exists, it won't exist. If it didn't exist, that's fine. This will still execute and it won't return an error. Mission accomplished. You didn't want it to exist. It doesn't. So now I don't need to worry about if it existed or not. And that means my next query can always be to insert a new row. Insert into disk data. I got to give it a list of column names. Computer name, drive, letter in the database, free space, size, and free percent. And the values I'm going to insert, for the computer name, it gets quoted. And that's going to be a sub-expression of input object dot computer name, and then a comma. Next one is the drive letter. That's also a string, so that's going to get quoted. Dollar input object dot drive. The next column I said I'm going to give it is free space, so that's input object dot free space, and that gets a dollar sign in front of input object because it's a variable, comma, dollar sign input object dot size, dollar sign input object dot free percent, end the parentheses, end the single quotes. So insert into disk data. Here are the columns I'm inserting. You'll notice I skipped the ID column. SQL's going to fill that in automatically for me. And here's the values. And I just need to list the values in the same order that I listed the columns. And we've already got our command object set up. It's already connected to the database. So all I have to do is say command text now equals this. And I actually don't need to do this. This doesn't have to be assigned to a reader. It will return a result, so I'm just going to do that to suppress the result. Command.execute non-query, out null. I actually think opening the connection returns result too, so I'm going to pipe that to out null just so I don't have to see it. So for each object that gets piped in, I'm going to delete any existing entry from the database, add a new one. And you know what? It's never a bad idea to do. I'm going to move the creation of my command object to the top of this block. And I'm going to make sure I add this write debug here in case I need to debug. And the only reason I do that is because now these things are kind of identical hunks. Create the command and connect it, execute a query, and then once this is all done, we'll close the connection. Okay, that was a lot. Let's save that, open up a shell, get disk details, computer name, localhost, and let's do dc.lab.pri. Just going to run that by itself, make sure I get results. There's my free space, drive, computer name, size, free percent. Okay, awesome. Pipe it to save disk details to database. No errors. I hope something happened. Let's go back into SQL Management Studio. I'll show you a little trick. Select the top 1,000 rows. And there they are. So it did insert that information. Now I do need to show you how to read through that information too. So here's what we're going to do. Let's minimize this. I'm going to close this. If you look at my get disk details, I think we rigged it up so that the computer name parameter can come as a value from the pipeline or by property name. So let's do this. There's a lot of different ways to read from a SQL database. I'm going to show you one of them. Function. Actually, I'm going to pull up a bit of documentation first. system.data.sql reader, SQL data reader, I think it's called. See if it finds anything. Okay, so I told you when you take a command and you execute a select query, it's going to return results, and you can have it return those results as a SQL data reader object. So what do you do with the SQL data reader object? You got a couple of things. You can have you can use has rows to determine if it has any rows in it. And that's useful if you execute a query and you're not actually sure if you're going to get any results back. But the cool thing you're going to want to do is down in methods. And there's a couple of methods we're going to wind up having to use here. Read. So if you kind of think of this as an Excel spreadsheet, when you get the SQL data reader object, it's going to kind of have its finger on the first row of data. Actually, pre the first row of data, it'll like have its finger on the column header. You execute the read method to advance to the next row, and it will actually return a value telling you if there's another row after that or not. So you can see the return value here is a system.boolean, and if you get a true, there are more rows after the one you're currently on. So we're going to use that to advance through each row in our data set. Once we're on a row, you use these get methods to actually retrieve the information from a given column. So get SQL string, for example. And you have to give it, and I'll show you this, you have to give these a number, right? It wants an integer for the column row, and you get to decide what order the columns come back in, so you'll know. So here's how we're going to do this. New function, get computer names for disk details from database. Just because I feel like writing a really long name. Commandlet binding, because I always write these as advanced functions. Parameter block. I don't think I actually need any parameters here, so I'm not going to do any. That means I don't need to accept pipeline input because I'm not accepting any input. So I'm just going to start right off with my connection object, which I'm going to shamelessly copy from up there. And need to outdent that a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I put my connection.close because I will forget. So I'll put that at the bottom. And now I'll start my, I'll do my command object next. I'll go ahead and create that. I can copy and paste him too. Boop, boop. In fact, I'll just grab all that. We'll outdent that a bit with Shift Tab. So I need to change my query because I don't want to delete things right now. What I want to do is select just the computer name column from disk data. So let's get all the computer names that are already in disk data. I can display that with write debug, setting my command text, reader equals command dot execute reader. I'm not sure why it's not giving me a I think it might not have seen this. Let's just hit enter and make sure it sees that command is that. I don't know what its problem is. Now, while reader.read, so you don't actually explicitly create the data reader using new object. It will be created and given to you by the command execute reader method. And so it's not going to tab complete because the ISE statically doesn't know that reader contains a SQL data reader. So while reader.read computer name equals reader get, and I need to go back to my documentation. What was the method that we used? Get SQL string. Get SQL string from column 0 because computer name is the first column that my query returned. Get SQL string and then write output computer name. We'll just put that string right into the pipeline. So save that. Now we're going to test this little doohickey all by itself. So we'll open up a fresh shell, get what did we call that? Get computer names for, all right, got to know what to type or it can't tab complete. Get computer names. See, The fact that it's not loading this makes me suspect that something is wrong. And that might be the problem that I had with it not tab completing either. And it might be because this param block is empty. I'm just going to delete that real quick. Save this again. Open up a fresh shell just in case it already had this module in memory. Get computer names. I'm still not doing it. Let's force it to load the module. This will be a good troubleshooting exercise. Import module, OS tools. No, it didn't have any problems. Let's look at our function drive. Oh, actually, get command from the module OS tools. It does have get computer names for, so get computer names for, oh, that's working now. Maybe that did fix it. Okay. So we had a couple of bits of output here, and those are probably from, yeah, those are probably from this read operation or execute reader. Hard to tell. Oh, it might be get SQL string. Let's do this. Let's pipe that to out null and see if that suppresses the output. Remove module OS tools because we made a change. Ah. Yeah, see, there's still a problem with that thing not working. Oh, heck. Okay, I know what the problem was. So, yeah, that's what happens when you don't work with this for a little while. I am going to, I added a little bit of debug code in here, so I'm going to get us back to where I was. Reader dot get SQL string from whatever column you're after dot value. That's all you need. This returned that object that we were looking at earlier. I just want to extract the value portion of it. So let's save that. Remove module OS tools. Get computer. Import module OS tools. Get computer names. There we go. Now, having read that from the database, I should be able to pipe that to get disk details, and it'll go get the disk details from those two computers, and now I can pipe that to save disk details to database, and it'll update them. So once I get all the computers populated in there, this reads them back out. This goes and gets their current disk information, and that will delete their old disk information from the database and save the new one back. So you can really make some neat little tools, and having made these tools, they're very, very simple to use. And so those are some good examples of, that's good examples of how to read information from the database, how to write information to the database, a couple of techniques for doing so. And look, you can go really far with this. And at some point, you might as well just pull out Visual Studio and start writing a C# program. I've tried to keep this kind of quick and dirty, kind of on purpose. Now, there's one other bit of information I can share with you. If you want to set up, you know, a pre-done little utility function that creates connections for you so that you're not copying and pasting this information all the time, that's not a bad idea. I do that in a lot of production modules as well. So that's another option you can explore. Oh, and there's one other thing I forgot to tell you. Now, when we looked at connectionstrings.com, you'll notice that it had connection strings for lots of other types of databases, Oracle, DB2, whatever. This type of object, as the name implies, can only connect to a SQL server. So the connection string has to be pointed to a SQL server. But you could, here, let's just get, I don't want to mess my function up. Get down here. New object, type name, system.data, OLEDB. Yeah, so there's this whole separate OLEDB section, and you can create an OLEDB connection, an OLEDB command, and there's an OLEDB reader as well. So really, if you needed this to work with a non-SQL Server database, you would just change these object type names, provide the appropriate connection string to whatever you are connecting to, and it will just work. Most of the time, you are going to have the appropriate ODBC drivers installed on your computer so that your computer knows how to talk to that type of a database. But that's the only other change you should have to make. So I walked you through installing SQL Server Express and setting up a database. That's a preliminary step. You've got to have a place for things to go. Obviously, you can set up your database wherever you have SQL Server available. Express is a nice option if you just need to save some information to your local computer. Now, what I did not get into is building reports off of that. If you want to do that, I really recommend you just dump the information into a database and then get SQL Server reporting services. And there's some great books and even some CBT nuggets on those things that you can watch if you want to explore SQL Server reporting services. What I covered was saving information to the database and reading it from the database. So rather than using PowerShell as a report generation tool, use PowerShell as a way to collect the data and get it into a database, and then let the database do the reporting. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.